So, this is welcome to another episode of the First Year Experience podcast, and hopefully the first of maybe possibly a web series, right? And this episode is meant to be kind of a retrospective, looking back on the first year of the First Year Experience podcast. So we made it a whole year, a whole academic year. We officially started in August of 2017. We are now at the conclusion of May 2018. And so what I wanted to do was kind of just reflect on the first year, sort of lessons learned. Did the podcast meet my own expectations? And so hopefully my guest here, do you want to introduce yourself before we continue?
I'm Aaron. I work on the podcast behind the scenes.
And so so hopefully Aaron and I will have a good conversation here. And he'll ask me some good questions that will allow me to maybe go a little deeper with the podcast. But I guess to begin, so I came to Cynthia Saldivar, one of our colleagues here, with the idea for the podcast. This was last summer, at the beginning of last summer, and I thought about a podcast because I listen to podcasts. And one that was I think part of me was assuming that students would listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
The good thing is, as a faculty member, I can assign the podcast to my students. Keeping them on task, or at least getting them to listen to it week to week, was tougher than I thought. And there were a number of challenges that occurred. Overall, I think that I was happy that, for one, I felt like recording the podcast week to week and putting out fresh new content every week is in itself an accomplishment.
Definitely. Especially with how busy you already are.
Yeah. No kidding. But I feel like if you listen to a podcast, and I know you listen to podcasts, I still listen to podcasts, being that consistent is tough. Being that consistent with anything is tough. So I was really happy with that. But now, having been in it a year and looking back, in one, I'm really proud of the consistency. I was happy with a lot of the conversations we had because I thought we had some really good conversations. But I think we're at a good point where now it's kind of like, okay, do we continue with the podcast? And if we do we continue in the same format, with the same look as we have over the last year? And so Aaron, as my guest and fellow collaborator, creator in this venture, what are your thoughts?
I think there's a lot to consider when you're going into fall 2018.
Okay.
As far as what the feature is for this podcast. You're saying how it looks. What do you mean by that? How do you envision a different?
Some of the feedback that I got from students is they wanted to see more video.
Okay.
So if we maybe go from 20 minutes to 15 minutes and maybe put more video, because I think a lot of them spend time on their computers or on their devices, and they're looking at whether it's YouTube or some other online video source or service. So something like that, doing video. There were, my students didn't say this, but my sense is there weren't enough student voices. I think we had a good number of faculty members on, which I appreciated, but maybe including students along with those faculty members. And so we revisit some of the topics or look at new topics. But what I would love to do is I would love to bring in students, and my role, maybe take a step back and facilitate a little more, not necessarily, but maybe co-host with a student, or maybe even stepping away and allowing students to take control of the podcast. And so maybe there isn't one consistent voice, but we have different people on the podcast. And so that way we never know where the conversation can go. I know that can be, that could backfire on us, right? But I feel I just want to hear more from the students, and I don't think I know I didn't do enough to get that aspect on the podcast. Yeah. So when I talk about how it would look, or making it look different and structuring it differently, that's what I'm thinking.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's adapting to you what you want to see from it, what maybe you didn't feel you got from the first season.
Well, and not necessarily what I got. The whole intent for the podcast was just trying to recognize and understand who our students are and where they're coming from in the sense of their use of technology. And I've always struggled with, how do I take advantage of those moments when they're online? They're connected to something where they're still connected to the class. And I what I want them to see is, and they're aware of this, but I maybe make it more formal in that learning doesn't stop when you leave a classroom, right? Ideally, every professor expects that their students are going to do their homework and read and look over notes and be prepared for the next class. I love that. Yes, that's what I expect. But more importantly, for me at least, I'd love for them to talk about the things that we are talking about in class and then extensions of those things and those topics outside of class.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in a scholarly manner, because I think a lot of the topics we address, especially in our learning framework class, are things that students deal with and think about all the time. And I want them to talk about it. I want them to feel like it's okay, I can talk about this. It doesn't have to be in like this scholarly format or in this very formal format of a classroom.
Okay.
That's what I want. This isn't for me. I mean, yeah, there's self-indulgence in this, right? But ultimately, it is about students connecting with others and recognizing, right, I'm not alone in this endeavor. Me being in college isn't something that I have to do on my own, and it certainly isn't something, or I'm experiencing something that others have experienced. And how can I learn from those experiences?
So I'm seeing, I've had you for 2 classes,
Mm-hmm.
and what I'm seeing is this kind of shifting to how you format your classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to hear from your students. You
Mm-hmm.
want their active participation, and that's an interesting idea. Whether it's you stepping away or by the week, right? Like you're in or you're out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just up to what the topic is. And if that calls for like maybe a senior student interviewing a freshman,
Yeah.
or vice versa, I think that's really gonna spice it up. That's gonna, I think, require viewers to participate.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really interesting idea. I like that.
Do you think we can do it?
I think so. Yeah. It's a little exciting being on camera on microphone.
Yeah.
People have this kind of like, they're at first, but it's a podcast. It's a different format, and it's creating content. I think a lot of students right now, especially, are used to that idea of there's content out there.
Yeah.
And there's people their age that are doing this, that are making lots of money off of it,
This is not a money-making venture by no means.
This is for them. And it's for us. But it's the idea that it's not hard to get in front of a camera anymore,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure when cameras made it to the average home, it was exciting and new.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of got annoying, and then it's coming back around. We're like, okay, it's a thing.
Yeah.
People sit in front of a camera for hours and just talk.
Yeah.
Why can't I? Why shouldn't I participate?
And I feel like I feel like students have a lot to say, and that's what I want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Right in class, I'm fascinated by the conversations that come up, and by the observations and realizations that students have, and I know more of them are thinking that. More of them are thinking about a topic or about something, or maybe even something loosely related to material in class. And I don't have those conversations unless I have them one-on-one with them. But I feel like others can benefit from those same conversations. And so for me, that's what I'd love to see. I'd love to see students talking around and about these topics and these themes.
So it's kind of moving the idea of a host to more of like the active participant, where a student is asking questions out of pure curiosity for their own sake.
Yeah.
And they're learning as they go.
Yeah. I don't know that we're going to learn any lessons in every podcast. And my hope is that every podcast is different, but that they're all engaging and that it's really being driven by the students. Mm-hmm. And so I want them to feel a sense of ownership with this. Because I've been through this, right? I've been through college. I earned the degree. But I know for them, it is a struggle. For them, it is a journey. And, I had countless outlets and people who could have conversations with. And so for a lot of our students, and maybe I'm making this huge assumption that they leave and they don't have these conversations. Maybe they are. Great. I hope they are. But in the one-on-one conversations that I have with my students, I feel like a lot of them don't. And so if the podcast can serve as a vehicle where they can have those conversations, I love that. Yeah. I don't know, any other thoughts from you? Or maybe things we could do with the podcast.
All right. So the 15-minute format is an interesting idea. It kind of brings up the idea of just content out there. But, I think we can cut this out if you don't want to talk about it. But at the beginning of the spring semester, we started the semester with this like plan, right? With these topics we're going to talk about and these people we want to get, or people in the field of whatever.
Yeah.
And we didn't, I feel like, attack it as well as we could have. Or and not that so much, but it was just hard scheduling it, right? Yeah. Especially on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah.
I think this summer we can work at an advantage. Mm-hmm. We can front load a lot of the work right now, but I'm wondering if you'd want to retry that and have that not necessarily be like the fall semester is every single week is planned, but like every 2 to 3 weeks there's a planned kind of topic that you want to jump in on that would be relevant to whatever you're teaching in your classroom.
Okay.
So you know what I mean? Like if we're doing students interviewing students, those are like kind of in between weeks. They're important and essential to the podcast, but it wouldn't be like an assigned week, right?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, I wanted one idea that I had was if we go and we try and record as many of our podcasts over the summer, right? Just because in the semester, I think what we learned is scheduling is great, but I think we met maybe half of those commitments. Otherwise, we had to come up with new topics.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of ideas. So I put an email out to my students that I had this last academic year, inviting them to participate in the podcast and to host and to come to me with ideas. So I've had 2 students come to me, one that just said, I'd love to be on the podcast. This would be his 3rd time on the podcast. Another student who reminded me that I wanted to have a podcast with DACA students and have a conversation with them about how they were feeling and what they were experiencing and sort of their fears and realizations. And so I'm going to put that out there to invite anybody who's interested in serving on the podcast. Any of the students out there, right? If you want to be on a podcast, you have something you want to talk about, come to us, contact us. The other idea that I had was, what if we develop the series around just getting through the first year? So how do I make the most out of orientation? Because we're going through orientations and there are countless students out there who aren't students yet, right? They haven't registered, but they're expected to go through orientation. And so how do I make the most of that experience? I've been to 2 orientations already, and I see students and they're wide-eyed. They look like deer caught in headlights, right? So what can we do to kind of ease those fears, right? Making the most of my advice. Like, what's advising, right? And so some of it is just kind of like getting through that first year, talking about the lingo, right? The jargon, because a lot of the terms are terms that, heck, I've been teaching here for 16 years, and there are terms that I feel like I'm exposed to every day, and I'm like, wait, what does that mean? And I've got to ask. So I can imagine what it must feel like for a student. Conversations about financial aid. Conversations about building your courses, picking a major, but getting it from the student's perspective, right? The students that have kind of been through it already. And what advice, right? Right? They say hindsight's 2020. So if they had to do it again, what would they do different? So I'm going to put that out there, right? If you want to give advice, if you want to help students through this first year and beyond, join us on the podcast.
I'm going to be ambitious and say you can contact us right here via email. They can reach us at.
Oh, okay. And then, thank you. And then if there are topics that are interesting to you and you'd love to discuss them, either with other students or with faculty members, again, contact us. Let us know, and we'll make it happen. And so, yeah, let's see if we can get it done. It is May 29th, and when this airs, it'll be in a couple of days, right? I think. So our goal is we want to record as many podcasts, get them audio and on video, and put them out there for students to see. And so contact us.
Yes, we need your help. We'd love your help.
We need your help, and yes, would love your help. If this podcast we expect this podcast to grow, we want it to grow, we can't do it without the voices of students. Mm-hmm. And so please contact us. Yeah. Anything else? Any final words or anything?
Continue watching. Thank you.
Yeah, share the podcast. We have a whole library of old episodes. Listen to them, especially if you're a first-year student or you're just going to enroll in the university. And I know you've got questions. Don't kid yourself. You have questions. Maybe they haven't come to you yet, but you're going to have questions. So please use the podcast as a resource. That's what we intended it for. So that being said, this concludes another episode of the First Year Experience podcast. Thank you for joining us. Again, you can find us on SoundCloud and on iTunes and hopefully on YouTube.
Yes.
Not too recent.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.